The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he put this question to his disciples: "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" And they said, "Some say he is John the Baptist, some Elijah, and others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." "But you," he said, "who do you say I am?" Then Simon Peter spoke up. "You are the Christ," he said, "the Son of the living God." Jesus replied, "Simon, son of Jonah, you are a happy man, because it was not flesh and blood that revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. So I now say to you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of the underworld can never hold out against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth shall be considered bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth shall be considered loosed in heaven." Then he gave the disciples strict orders not to tell anyone that he was the Christ. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Another big text. Huge. Huge beyond belief. In the Catholic tradition, this is a seminal text for a whole range of reasons, as you'll see in this homily. We also understand, in terms of interpreting texts, what we will call the liturgical reading of the text. The first reading is always to interpret the gospel reading. And to understand the gospel today, you really have to understand the context of this first reading, because that's how we start to understand what the gospel is speaking to and the action of Jesus in the gospel text. So in our first reading from Isaiah 22, you have the king dismissing a servant. The servant is Shabna. And he's being dismissed because of his disloyalty. He's being dismissed because he was not a man of God. He was being dismissed because his life wasn't right with God. And the king was dissatisfied because of his life, and therefore he's dismissing him. And in his place, he's putting Eliakim to take up that office. And this first part is very important for us to understand. This person, Shabna, is not doing something in his own name and in his own right. He's doing it because he's holding an office within the kingdom of Israel. And that's the first piece of the text that must be understood. And not only is he holding an office, but when he is dismissed, on the same day, a new office holder must be put in place. Now we can get past that one. And what does this office consist of? Well, this person is the one who will hold the keys of the kingdom. You get any connection with the gospel as yet? Holding the keys. Holding the keys. And he said, I invest you with my robe, with my gird you with my sash. I entrust you with your authority, and you shall be father. Now, there's a good reason why we call the Pope, you know, because it comes from Papa. Papa, father. You shall be a father to the inhabitants and to the house of Judah. I place the keys of the house on your shoulder. In other words, around your neck. Should you open, no one will close. And should you close, no one will open. So this one, Eliakim, is given this office. It's an office to be father. It's an office to open and to close. It's an office that is where he's given keys for the office. I drive him like a peg into a firm place, and he will become a throne of glory for his father's house. So this person is second in command only to the king. So you have the king, then you have this office holder. It's like the overlord of the whole kingdom. And that's the background now of our text. It's the only place in the whole of scriptures that talks about keys being given where binding and loosing will take place. And that's important to understand now as we switch to our gospel reading with Jesus. So they go to Caesarea Philippi, the remotest part of Israel, furthest away from Jerusalem, just in the foothills before Lebanon. And Jesus is talking about who do people say I am? And the disciples are coming up with various answers. And then it is Peter. It is Peter who says, "You are the Christ. You are the Son of the living God." Now, I want to unpack that a little bit for you. Christos, that's the anointed one. That's the one that the whole of Israel has been expecting to come for a long while. The whole ferment of Israel was, when would the Messiah come? And what would he look like? And what would he do? And how would it be? And all of Israel is buzzing around the Messiah coming. Peter recognizes in Jesus Christ the man that he is the Messiah, the Christ, the expected one. But he recognizes more than that. Because he goes on to say, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Son of the living God is a different title. It's a divine title. He's saying that you are of God. You are God. And in this Son of the living God, Peter is recognizing both that Jesus is the Christ, the one who is to come, and also that he is God. And we have these two bits of revelation that's coming through Peter in this text. And both are important. Because the Messiah could be a human figure, but in this case, Peter is saying, no, the Messiah is actually, or the Christoph, he is a divine figure. And that this human being that looks like flesh and blood in front of our eyes, this one is actually God, the Son of God. And this revelation is very important. And as we go forward now, to say that there's something true about what Peter says, Jesus says, "You are a happy man, because it was not flesh and blood that revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven." In other words, Jesus is confirming the revelation of Peter that sees Jesus both as Christ and as God. And now we go forward. And he's saying and this revelation comes only from the Father in heaven. And so if Jesus now is the Son of God, we're now talking about the Father in heaven. And you start to see now the Trinity appearing in the text. And it goes on now in the weirdest of ways. And so now I say to you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church. Now we know from the beginning of the gospel that the man's name was actually Simon. Huh? We know that. Peter only comes now. Up till now, we know that his name was Simon. In fact, he's introduced. Then Simon Peter spoke up, using both of the words. We also know that, and they've looked, Cephas, which is the Aramaic for Peter, was not a known name at that time. There's some traces of connecting words that could be surnames, but no one was called Caiaphas. You don't look at a beautiful little child, a little baby boy, and say you're going to be Rock. I mean, come on, really? Rock. Yeah, the shape of his head, something. Your name is Rock. Nobody does that. Because that's what Peter is, Petros, and Petros is rock, and rock is this foundation stone. So you don't call a child Rock. I mean, I know we had Rocky, but he had that name for a reason because he was a boxer and a hard man. But that's another story. But the name as a first name, Petros was not used, or Cephas was not used in that time as a first name. So Jesus is giving a name that is not in use at the time. That means the name has very deep significance. And in this we should hear Abraham, who was Abram, and God, which meant father of many. And God changed his name from Abram to Abraham, which means father of nations. And the change of the name designates the office and the mission to which this person is being called. And every time God meets somebody and changes their name, the name really designates what the office is and the purpose in God's kingdom is. And the purpose that he has with Simon now is the purpose of being rock. And now we have to understand that. And it goes on to say that and on this rock I will build my church. This is a piece that they can't deal with, You're building something, My church. Ecclesia, the term in Greek would be the assembly. The band of people gathered together around Peter. And what is emerging is that Peter is the centerpiece of this band, this assembly that is gathering. And in understanding Peter as the center or as a rock upon which this ecclesia is being built. Cornerstone. Think of you're building a house, you have a nice piece of land, and half your land is sand and half your land is solid rock. Which half you're going to build your house on? You're going to build it on the rock, not on the sand. And he says, and another time, if a man build a house on sand, what will happen to it? But if he builds it on rock, what will happen to it? And Jesus is building. But he's building his church. And he's building his church on rock. And he's calling it my church. And it's singular. It's not my churches. It's a singular. My church. And in understanding that, we already understand that there's something happening in this text that makes our experience in the 21st century very, very weird. Because Jesus has an intentionality to build his church on the rock that is Peter. And this is what is critical. And then he goes on to say, and the gates of the underworld can never hold out against it. And I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Here back to this overlord of the kingdom. And whatever you bind on earth shall be considered bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth shall be considered loose in heaven. Go back to the formula in the overlord, who is given the keys. What you open, no one will close. What you close, no one will open. And then he gives the disciples strict orders not to tell anyone that he is the Christ. I needed to hear this text, and I needed to hear it very carefully. Simon is not just a human being who was a fisherman, who happened to be called by Jesus, who followed Jesus as a disciple. Simon was also the man that Jesus called on this occasion and changed his name because of his mission and gave him the mission to be the foundation stone of his church that he was building. Now, the keys are not the keys to the church. And this is the piece that people miss. So it's not that whatever Peter binds in the church is bound, The keys are the keys to heaven. Whatever you bind on earth, consider it bound in heaven. And this is critical. I mean, Peter was the most impetuous of all the disciples. He could put his 2 feet in his mouth in a moment's notice. And Jesus entrusts to him an authority that is beyond our wildest imagination. That what Peter does here on earth, that is done properly and well in heaven for all time. That, brothers and sisters, that is how we understand the Petrine office, but also how we understand the church. We can't understand the church without the Petrine office. And we can't understand the Petrine office without the church, because the two are given flesh on the same occasion. You are Peter, you are the rock, and on this rock I build my church. The rock and the church are intertwined. Now, let's go a little bit deeper into the text, because you see, in the Holy of Holies, there was a rock. Yeah, in the Holy of Holies, there was a rock. And that rock was the altar of sacrifice. And that's where the blood of the goats for sin sacrifice was spilled. That rock, some in the Jewish tradition believed, was the rock that was the plug when we had the flood. And also, it's a rock that keep Hades at bay. It is a rock in the Holy of Holies upon which the whole temple is built and supports the whole temple, the ecclesia. And in the text, what we have to hear is that Jesus is now constituting the 12 as the new Israel, and Peter as the rock upon which the new Israel will build a temple, a church, and that new church, a spiritual entity, has the power to bind and loose in heaven as on earth. Our brothers and sisters of the Christian tradition, they want to believe that the Petrine office is an invention of the Middle Ages. It's not. It is an invention of Jesus Christ. And the second thing is they want to believe that, well, that's good for inside of the Catholic Church, but it has no say for them. It is not. The keys of Peter are binding for all of heaven and earth. And insofar as you are a disciple of Jesus Christ, the keys of Peter bind you. And this is why I am always so upset when I hear people calling themselves Christians, and Catholics at that, who are ridiculing Peter and who are crying down our Holy Father, and who are making a mockery out of his decisions and out of who he is. That is not just bad hospitality, it's bad theology, it is disobedience. That is what it is. It is disobedience to the structure that Jesus put in place. Now let's go a little further in the text, because it says that the gates of the underworld will not hold out against you. And this is a piece that we need to hear. For a long time, the church nearly operated as a fortress, with its gates keeping out a hostile world out there. But that's not our text. The imagery in the text is that it is the underworld that is a fortress. It is the kingdom of darkness and evil. That's the fortress. They are terrified behind their boundaries and their fences. The kingdom of evil has erected all these big fences and boundaries, and they are in there terrified, sending people out from time to time, risking. And they're terrified because they understand that the church is not just an earthly institution. They don't see the church the way you and I see it, with all its flaws and all of its oddities and all of its humanity and all the foolish things that people in the church have done. They don't see it just from the sexual scandals and from the financial scandals and the incompetency of priests, of bishops, of even popes at times. They don't see it that way. The underworld sees the church with dread and fear and understands that the church marching through history has a mission, and that mission will be fulfilled, and the gates of the underworld will be put to flight. Those gates will be smashed. And in the smashing of those gates, the very enclave of evil will be brought to nothing, and light will penetrate everything that is evil. And that we belong to a church, brothers and sisters, instituted by Jesus Christ himself on the stone, the foundation stone, which is Peter. And that foundation stone, that office of overlord, that office second only to the King, who is Jesus Christ, and he answers only to Christ. And whether we have two churches that want to be claiming, as we had in 1000, so up till 1056 there was only one church. In 1056 then we had a break off with the Eastern Orthodox tradition, breaking from the Catholic Church. Then in the 1500s, we had another break with the Protestant tradition, and it was about 7 or 8 or 9. Now it's about 30-something thousand individual churches claiming all to be the true church of Jesus Christ. And so when you hear people saying that the Catholic Church is this and that and the other, smile, smile, because not one of them can trace their lineage back to Peter, and not one of them have an office holder whose lineage from generation to generation to generation goes right back to Peter. Not one single one of them. And we build ecumenical unity because we understand that everyone who believes in Jesus Christ belongs to his kingdom, and so we work with the ecumenical fervor to try and unite that which has been scattered. And everything in us as Catholics has to do what we can to bring this unity to the scattered sheep of Jesus Christ throughout the world. But do not be alarmed and do not be deceived. There is only one church, and there is only one shepherd, and there's only one overlord, and that is the Petrine office. El Papa, the Pope, the Holy Father, Pope Francis is the current holder of the keys, and he has the power to bind and to loose. And what he binds is well bound. And what he looses is well loose. And that's why when the Holy Father says that the pandemic, that the drug and the vaccine to be had cannot be held for rich nations alone. They must find a way that every person in the world receives the vaccine, and that it must be distributed widely, even to those who have no money to pay. That's the binding and loosing power of the Holy Father. When he talks about the migrants and what we must do in welcoming, protecting, in caring for the migrants, that's the binding power of the Holy Father. He leads the Christian consciousness in the issues of the day, that we hear the voice of Jesus Christ because he acts on Christ's behalf. And so now we face this pandemic, and we're shut back into our houses one more time. And we're terrified because the spike is going up crazy, crazy, crazy. And I say to you, do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid of the microbe. And do not be afraid of the pandemic. And do not be afraid of those who come to steal our joy and hope, because God is using even this God is using to help people to understand that his kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, that his kingdom is incarnate here on earth, that the church is a sacrament of unity, and his sign on earth of what he is doing and who he's calling people to. And so as we come this 21st Sunday, shut back up in our houses, feeling as if we are the ones who are behind this great wall because of the pandemic, now you understand how the evil feels. Now you have a sense of the terror that the kingdom of darkness has when it sees the church. Now you understand, when you shut your door and you stay inside, how the evil one really experiences the horror of the church in her true glory and majesty as she marches through the world proclaiming the name of Jesus Christ in every place, every tongue, every language. Do not be afraid, because it is Christ who is victorious. Amen.